Welcome back to HC Daily. We're so glad that you decided to join us today. We're going to look at a passage where the three Hebrew boys don't bend, they don't bow, and they don't burn. So that's what we're talking about today on HC Daily.
You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forrester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
Okay, Wesley, so this is my week to ask you questions. We're getting to know Wesley Woods.
These are some tough questions.
So Wesley, tell us about your professional life from, college. What did you do? Have you always been in ministry? How long have you been in ministry? Those kind of things.
So I've been in ministry since '98. I went to Eastern Michigan University.
Yeah. Eagles.
The Eagles.
Yeah.
Then I transferred from there to Wayne State. And I got a business degree from Wayne State. Then I went to work for a steel company in the office as an intern.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought I had literally arrived. I'm like 20 years old. I got a suit and tie on.
Yeah.
I've arrived. I'm living the life. And it was in the Renaissance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so in the Renaissance. So I thought I had just hit the corporate, level right there.
Rolling in the most iconic building in the city, Detroit, every day, wearing your suit and tie.
Yeah, and I ended up staying there for 13 years at that company.
Wow.
And then they ended up downsizing, and my position was eliminated. And that's a whole nother sermon in and of itself. Yeah. Had that not happened, I would have never come to Heritage Church.
Oh, wow.
I had been praying to God about doing ministry full time, but there wasn't really a way to do it. But that was all like the catalyst to kind of push me out to get me to go do ministry. One thing led to another, and I ended up here. So
yeah, wow.
Yeah, God can use those, what we perceive as bad sometimes, to do great things.
Well, yeah, what a wonderful blessing it's been, Heritage Church, to have you be on the team. So thank God for that. But, interesting. So working in for a steel company, did you make the steel? Did you work the furnaces?
No, I did not. No? I would not have done a good job
at that. Weird to wear a suit and tie to do that.
So no, I was just in the office section. Okay. The steel was made overseas, and they would ship it over to the East Coast, and we truck it all into where it needed to go.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, then now here at Heritage, being associate pastor, that really is a fancy title for the everything else pastor, isn't it?
It's just as glamorous as working in the Renaissance. Just as glamorous.
Except you don't have to wear the suit and tie. You're welcome to. If you want to wear a suit and tie every day, we can work that out for you.
Yeah.
Well, good. So we're continuing in the life of Daniel. And again, you got to remember that this is kind of happening over years in his life. And now, we've seen Daniel take a stand. We've seen Daniel take an opportunity to, point the king to the fact that God is the king of the universe. Yeah. And then when the king promotes him, he becomes, the head of Babylon. And he says, hey, I'm going to need some help. I can't do this job by myself. Yeah. I need Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to help me. And they become like his lieutenants running Babylon. So these guys are big dogs with a lot of power at this point. Yeah. They're not the top of the kingdom, but nearly. These are almost cabinet level leaders, right? Yeah. And they really get in the middle of it in a pretty rough way here in chapter 3. So it's really exciting. It's an inspiring story. Many of our listeners maybe have heard it before, but if you haven't, this is one of the coolest stories in the Bible. So here we go. Chapter 3, New Living Translation, Book of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon.
I don't think that was big enough, Jeff.
Yeah, 90 feet tall. It's 9 stories.
Yeah.
Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow down to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshipped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to name a few,
Yeah.
whom
We're
you
not
have
saying any names.
yeah, we're not saying any names, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up." Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Did we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," They replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair of their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned to heaps of rubble." He seems to like that.
Yeah.
That consequence, right?
Yeah, everything is in excess with him. He never just does
It's
anything
all over the
normal.
top.
Yeah.
He says there is no other God who can rescue like this. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. What a story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an awesome story.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to point out here, Jeff, and if anyone is watching and they want to get this for me for my birthday, I just want a zither.
A zither?
I have no clue what it is, but I just need one. I just kind of feel that way.
So a zither would be, I think, aren't zithers like little guitar kind of things?
Could be.
Harp things? Yeah. I don't know. Or maybe they're like, I don't know. But I think it is funny that he says, okay, when you hear the band start playing, everybody bow down, right?
But we see here in verse 16 how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to Nebuchadnezzar that basically, we don't care what happens to us.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want to us. We're going to do what God told us to do. We're going to remain godly, and we will not bow. Yeah. And they said, we're not going to even be careful in how we say this to you.
Yeah.
It is what it is. We will not bow. We will not serve your gods.
Well, you see this when they're younger. They're probably 15 or so. That's what tradition says. When they said that they determined in their heart not to defile themselves.
Yeah.
And then they were facing struggles then.
Yeah.
But they trusted God and God's ways, and they chose to go his way. Yeah. And then God bails them out.
Yeah.
And then Daniel has the courage to say, there is a God in heaven, and he's going to overcome all the kingdoms of this world.
Yeah.
And Nebuchadnezzar honored him and then promoted him and the guys. So each time that they were faced with a difficult situation, they chose to go God's way and honor God, and then God elevated them. But there's a really amazing thing here. They believe strongly that God will deliver them. But if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow.
Yeah.
And so
I think that's an amazing statement right there.
There's not an expectation that God must
Yeah.
obey them, or that God must rescue them. You know, Stephen in the New Testament was just a young man when he was the first martyr for Christ.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus was only 33 when he died.
Yeah.
Paul was only 60 when he died. Peter was crucified upside down.
Yeah.
So not every circumstance does God say, you know what, I'm going to bail you out of the fire and I'm going to promote you. But sometimes God does choose to do that. And they were willing to trust God regardless of the consequence or the outcome.
Yeah, I think that's really important for everyone listening to understand. Sometimes when we pray, we believe that the best solution to our prayer is what we're asking for. And God, who sees all and knows all, may have another way. He may have another solution, another route. The same with me and how I was talking about that job.
Yeah.
My prayer to God was I wanted to do ministry full time. I would not have picked that route of losing my job and then having to get unemployment to get to the destination.
Yeah.
But God knew there was a learning process in there, and that was part of the process to get to the destination.
That fire refined you.
Yeah.
It made you stronger. It made you better. And that's what fire does.
Yeah.
To metal, fire purifies gold. Fire strengthens steel.
But it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good.
It
I
does
can't
not
imagine.
feel good at all.
Yeah. And the fear of the fire sometimes, I think, drives us to compromise our decisions before we actually feel the heat.
But let me toss this in. It's not in our notes or anything like that. Would you say that sometimes that the fear of the fire is worse than the fire itself?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you see these guys, this fire was so hot that the guards who were throwing them in died immediately.
Again,
right?
Why couldn't they just heat it to twice?
I know.
But they got to do it 7 times hotter.
Well, he's so excessive, King Nebuchadnezzar, right? But, you know, they're probably close to vaporized.
Yeah.
So this death would have been so quick.
Yeah.
Because it was so hot. But the fear of the fire for us, or like, you know, the Bible describes Satan as a roaring lion. The roar scares us far more, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we compromise because some boss threatens us, or because some new policy is put out there, and it's going to force us to compromise our biblical position or our the place that God would call us to, and we concede and we cave in. Well, these young men didn't. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe you have a boss who says, I want you to fudge the numbers or you're going to lose your job, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever. And these young men say, hey, God's going to deliver us. But if he doesn't, we're still not going to defile ourselves.
We're still going to trust him.
Right? We're only going to honor God. And so that's really incredible. You know, as modern Christians, American Christians especially, for most Americans, our biggest goal is to never have a struggle. Right? We don't want any problems.
Yeah.
And the worst thing that could ever happen is a problem. Oh, I had to work too hard. I sweated too hard. It wasn't as easy for me as it was for somebody else, right? And we start to take up this victim mentality in our life that if only God would bless us, our life would be easier, as if that's God's main goal, is to make your life easier. God's goal, most Christians pray like God's goal is for them to be on vacation year-round.
Yeah, 24/7.
Yeah, right. It's just going to be sunshine and
tulips running through fields,
drinks with umbrellas, and people serving us, and right. You're never going to have a problem. We're shocked by that. These guys don't have an expectation of no problem.
Yeah.
And there's a song that I love from a number of years ago that says, he never promised that the cross wouldn't get heavy or the hill wouldn't be hard to climb. He never offered a victory without fighting, but instead he just promised to show up in time, just on time. Yeah. And then it says, remember that when you're standing at the crossroads of decision, that he will go through the fire with you, right? That's really the idea behind it. And he doesn't say it's not going to get hot, it's not going to get hard. God just says, I'm going to go with you. And this is what happens. Nebuchadnezzar looks in and goes, didn't we throw 3 men in?
Yeah.
I see 4th, and the 4th one looks like God.
But the part even before that, Jeff, that I love is the fact that they were thrown in bound, tied.
Yeah.
But then when he looked in, not only were they walking around, but there was another person there.
Yeah. Well, the bindings are gone. So, so the thing that the king tried to do had zero effect. Even the bindings are gone, and now they're walking around in there. Now, most theologians would say they believe this is another one of those theophanies. Jesus showing up. This is Jesus,
type of Christ,
right? Showing up there in this moment, communing with them. And I think it's funny, they don't walk out. They're just walking around. Hey, this fire's not so bad. Hey, Jesus, right? And they're just walking around. They're not trying to escape. And then the king had to call them out of the fire. That's how little effect this had on them in that moment. And they didn't even smell like smoke.
And I'm encouraged by that, the fact that I can have peace in the midst of the fire. I can have peace in the midst of the storm. And maybe you're watching right now and you're there right now. You're in the midst of a storm. You don't see how the door is shut. You don't know how you're going to get out of this thing like they were in the furnace. But when you know that God is with you, even the fire becomes palatable.
That's right.
You can even take it and stand it when God is on your side.
And throughout history, there have been, literally millions of martyrs who died, many of them because of fire. And the historical stories behind so many of these people who died, God also gave them grace to go through the other side. So God's going to do what brings him glory in the moment. It's going to have the greatest effect of pointing people to Jesus, right? In this moment, it was he set them free from the fire. In others, it's when they give their life and it inspires more people to come to faith in Christ. And so whatever the next step is, whatever the next thing that's going to happen to you, when you choose to honor God and say, I'm not going to bend the knee, I'm only going to serve God, and I'm only going to do what his words say, no matter the consequence, God will step in and he'll take care of you. You might not live through it, but hey, how can a real Christian be threatened with heaven? Right? The other side of it is maybe God will. And then at that point, you got to give glory to God, because that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar does. Is when he comes out, they had already said, we are going to honor God and he'll protect us. And then when it was all done, Nebuchadnezzar knew for sure. They don't even smell like smoke. Their hair's not even singed. And he immediately begins to worship God.
I almost laughed when I read verse 26 when it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Like, okay, wait a minute. You were just talking about killing people, ripping them their limbs off.
You just built a 90-foot tall God, a 9-story building, essentially this giant statue, and now he's saying the Most High God. Even higher than the God I could make. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So then, of course, he says here, now nobody's allowed to talk poorly about their God. And he says, and if they do, they're going to be torn limb from limb, and their house is going to be turned into heaps of rubble. That's his big threat. He did that in the previous chapter too, same one. But that's it. So then, when it's all done, the king promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. And so, again, you can thrive in Babylon. And you can do well. I've heard so many people say, well, I feel like there's a separation between my work week life and my church attendance life.
What is that you always say about your faith being private?
Well, so people will say, my faith is very private, and that's just not a biblical concept at all. It doesn't. Your faith is very personal. It should be personal, but it's not private. It's always lived in the context of other believers, right? In relationship with others. But there's a lot of people who will separate the kind of decisions they're required to make because, hey, the construction industry is just really rough. It's I work around a lot of rough men and a lot of rough women, and we just have to make hard decisions, blah, blah, blah. And what they're doing is they're justifying sometimes bad behavior and bad and wicked decisions, saying that's just how business gets done. And what I would say is you can thrive in Babylon where there's a lot of wickedness, and you can still choose to do the right thing. Now, you might go through the fire, but on the other side of that, the king promoted him. Even to higher positions. And so I think that the most important thing that we can learn from them is you can thrive in Babylon, you can do the right thing, and then trust that God's going to take care of you. And ultimately, in this circumstance, God chose to promote him.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So wrap it up. What's the big takeaway in your mind before we send everybody on their way?
I would just say this one sentence. Don't tire in the fire because God is on your side.
Wow, don't tire in the fire Man, that's
Yeah.
great. Wesley, I wish I could come up with your phrases,
Yeah.
right? You got these. Don't tire in the fire because God's on your side. Don't forget that today. That's fantastic. Well, that's going to do it for us today here on HC Daily. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow as we continue in the life of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.